Hello, and welcome to a special recording of Cyber Threats Exposed. Not only are we filming on location at Sphere 24 in Helsinki, but we're joined by the one and only Mikko Hyppönen.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
As ever, I'm Tim, and I'm joined by Steve.
Hello there.
Both working in threat intelligence team at WithSecure. That's the last time we'll mention WithSecure, hopefully, in this podcast, because it's not about products and branding and marketing. It's about the threats.
Absolutely. This is a WithSecure and intelligence-free zone. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You just said WithSecure.
Yeah. We've had quite an interesting couple of days at Sphere where we've been talking about the evolution of the cyber threats and where the bad guys are gaining ground and where they're losing ground. And I actually kind of wanted to focus a little bit more here on where we've done a good job. Where the cyber threat kind of hasn't evolved, past our defenses, and where we've managed to push back the tide in one way or another to score up some wins for the good guys.
Absolutely, yeah. Talking so much about how the threat's evolving, but not really talking about how we're evolving.
Yeah. And I like to think about these things with a little bit longer perspective. So, for example, if you think back 10 years, like where we were 10 years ago, where we are today, the situation from security point of view really is like night and day. And it really is so much better than it used to be. If you look at it with a lens like that, we're actually doing pretty okay. Cybersecurity is getting better. And I know what this sounds like. I mean, we see all these breaches all the time and data leaks and ransomware. It doesn't feel like it's getting better. But consider the typical day of your life in 2014. You were browsing around with your Windows computer with Flash plugins inside your browsers, getting exposed to all kinds of drive-by downloads, which actually would drop binaries on your computer, which you most likely would be running with local admin rights, and they would just straight up execute from your system and build whatever they want to build. Clearly, that's not a problem anymore. We've solved that.
Well, we've mostly solved that problem. I do remember the oh crap moment of you browse to a website and suddenly there's that flicker. You go, what was that?
Yeah.
And these days, I mean, or
a small DOS box comes and goes very quickly.
Yes, I didn't download that. But we have different threats now to that. That was just, as you say, straight drive-by, and now at least it does require that interaction as well. And there's been some stuff recently. So we've been talking about all this mass exploitation stuff, and one of the things that kind of comes out of that is people go, oh well, phishing and maldoc delivery, that's going down. And when you try and think about, okay, why are these things happening? There's lots of reasons to look at why mass exploitation is going up. But one thing is, it's like it's like a rising tide or a pool of water of badness. And if the defenses are going up, on the endpoints where the users are, and they are, that's what we put a lot of effort into, then they're going to look for somewhere else a bit easier.
Yes.
They found somewhere that was out of our view. But that does mean those defenses at the user land are getting better. I saw something recently, people complaining about the phishing training. You get your fake phishing emails through, and it just makes people hate IT departments. Sorry, I worked in IT, they hate you already. Yeah. But it does mean that people are suspicious about the emails they're getting, and that's okay, bad, but it's good.
Yeah, it's somewhat helpful. And if you look at for example, mobile security. I mean, you look at how much more secure the device that you use to do a very big part of your daily computing is compared to traditional computers because of the lack of legacy inside these systems and the fact that they are not programmable. You don't really write programs for your iPhones and run them on that device. Would you do that on your computer, or you have the capability of doing that on your computers? And that's probably the biggest improvement in cybersecurity in the last 15 years. In my book, the introduction of these more restrictive operating systems like iOS and even Android, which clearly is much more restrictive than your Mac OS or your Windows.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge shift in the daily security. And I also like to point out the fact that Xbox One has now been out for a decade, and it still hasn't been cracked. And one of the ironclad rules of cybersecurity used to be that if you gain physical access, it's game over. If you're on the keyboard, you can do anything you want. Yeah. Well, people have been on the keyboard of Xbox One, which is a Windows computer,
absolutely,
for a decade, and they still haven't cracked it. So we've sort of perfected physical security. Xbox One is a Windows computer which nobody has broken after 10 years, after trying very hard. The rewards for cracking gaming console security are immense, and they haven't been able to do it, even though they have physical access. And that's insane.
Yeah.
That's a great accomplishment from Microsoft.
Yeah. Sat right there in your living room, being taken for granted. I mean, that could make an entry in my list of infrastructure devices, apart from it's one where it's not been done over.
Yeah.
Of course, these systems are quite different from their security threat model compared to traditional computers, because on your gaming console, you have to protect against outside attackers, but also against the owner of the device, because if they can not only pirate games, which destroys your business model, the other threat scenario is cheating. Most of the games people play are multiplayer games, which sometimes they play for big money because of competitive gaming. If someone cheats, others don't want to play, and the whole business model collapses.
It's an astoundingly kind of common pathway into kind of malign cyber activity as well, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, it starts at the kind of top of a slippery slope, just doing little kind of game modifications and game hacks and cracks.
And they make their way in, because if you're selling one type of technically malicious code, then you can sell others. There was a case quite recently where suddenly, I think a competitive tournament, one player suddenly was obviously using an aimbot, but they weren't. Someone had hacked their computer,
which is nuts,
and had started doing that to them, and basically the whole $1 million possibly tournament was thrown out of whack because of that.
I wonder what the motive was. Because apparently it was a 0-day, which is nuts.
Yeah,
I always remember there was a 0-day in Counter-Strike,
right?
Where in Counter-Strike you could spray paint a image on walls as you ran past. This was obviously heavily abused for unpleasant images, but also it meant you downloaded a JPEG from somebody.
Right.
So you got a malicious JPEG that got parsed properly, did an overflow, and so there was that, and I think there was also one called Flashbang or something. It was to do with throwing a grenade, and you could get basically set up your server so that it would execute code when someone threw a grenade, and all of these things.
There's actually there's a GitHub for a compiler that compiles cheats inside some version of these games using a ROP compiler. So all the gadgets are built out of the memory of the game itself. So you don't have to get any new code, and you could compile anything, which is just, I mean, people go to amazing lengths to crack these games. And that's a testament to the security of this Microsoft box, Xbox One. Despite all of these rewards and despite all of these skills, despite of the fact that people have been trying to soldier different things on the motherboard, try to crack it different ways, after a decade, they still haven't done it. And that's amazing. It's the most secure Windows computer on the planet. It's just nuts.
Probably is.
Yeah.
Statistically, it probably is. I mean, I say statistically. I mean, obviously, actually. But yeah.
Probably one of the more prevalent ones as well. You know, there's one in quite a lot of households around.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that Sony had their brief experiment with letting you run Linux on PlayStations.
Yeah, they quickly changed their mind.
Very brief, yes, exactly. Because, a lovely, powerful operating system that the user can do many, many things with. Possibly not what you want in that situation.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to know what killed it. I mean, Google killed the Flash exploit route.
Yeah.
And of course, Apple killed it as well. Apple didn't build Flash into iPhone, which started the downfall.
At the time, seemed like an astounding choice.
Right. Well, how on earth? What do you mean you don't support Flash? And then in 2015, Chrome killed the plugin for Flash, and that really then stopped Flash.
Hang on. Are we saying that after all of this is an unintended consequence of a product decision?
No. The reason they killed it was security. Really.
Okay.
And well, at least for Google, that's the reason. For Apple, I don't actually know.
That's a relief. I thought we'd undermined our entire point there.
At the time, I believed that Apple didn't include it because it broke the walled garden. And obviously, from a certain viewpoint, from a traditional viewpoint, Apple's walled garden for techies is annoying. Because we don't like being told what to and not to do.
Yes.
But in that case, they were correct to say we do not want that in here.
They also complained about power usage, which on mobile devices is a very, very good concern. And Flash really did eat batteries a lot. So
yeah, and we have that issue with some of the ad network stuff as well now, with ads showing on mobile taking up a lot of battery power and so on. But
I think they're mining when that happens.
It could be. Oh, it's almost less annoying mining. But I mean, the fact that we quite rarely have ad networks kind of replaced for me in a way that, Flash is the annoyance of the internet, but we so rarely see. We do talk about malicious ad networks, but the fact we have to make that very clear distinction that there is that small proportion of them.
The thing that really blows my mind is that in 1994, when I set up the first website for this company, I remember that we had a chat with the guys in the lab about how this web is going to become a big deal. Like, every company's going to have a website. At the time in 1994, Microsoft didn't have a website. Apple didn't have a website. We had a website, which was cool. And I remember we were thinking about how all the services, like newspapers, would eventually go online. You could read the news. You could check the weather report from the web. This would be cool. But then someone in the lab posed a question that, hey, hold on. Why would newspapers move their news from the paper to this online service unless they get paid somehow? There must be a payment mechanism. How are we going to pay for the online content? And of course, we had no idea in 1994. But we all assumed that, well, of course, there's going to be some payment system. There's going to be a payment button. I'd like to read this news. You click the button and you pay a micropayment, a cent, a half a cent, something, to get access to this news item you want to read. And the thing that blows my mind, that was 30 years ago, and we still don't have the button today. Instead, we came up with this completely different mechanism for paying for content, which is this profiling of every person on the planet and then using that information to push targeted ads to us. I wish someone would have built the button in 94 and we wouldn't have this system. And we wouldn't have these ad networks. And we wouldn't have your battery dying because of these ads.
And the terrible thing is that, in effect, instead of you clicking the button and you paying, you click a button to view a story and somebody else pays.
Everybody loses.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of positivity. I think with artificial intelligence, I still can't really get over people kind of asking me and expecting AI to be this silver bullet for attackers. And obviously we work in the business of cyber threat, right? So we deal every day in malicious actors and what they're up to and what they're trying to achieve. So it's hard not to put yourself in the perspective of how can this be misused. But the defensive boons for AI are tremendous, in my opinion. I think one of the analogies that you kind of use as a maybe in law enforcement or even as a network defender is the attackers have to be in one place and you have to be everywhere. But now you've got kind of technology that can be everywhere, and the attackers necessarily don't have access to even cheap AIs. Maybe they've got some level of access to a cheap AI, but they'll be guarded.
Guardrailed.
We can kind of prove, like I say, from the point of view of looking at threats, we can prove that they can bypass these guardrails, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's proportionate.
And that's the interesting thing about these guardrails and safety and security features of AI systems, especially large language models, but also like image generators, for example. The interesting thing is open source versus closed source, or open model versus closed model. Famously, OpenAI themselves went from open systems or open models and open source code to closed because of security considerations. That's what they say themselves. And if you build an AI model and you publish it as open source, anybody can remove all the safety and security work you've done. Practical example of that of what that means in practice would be all these porn generators. Midjourney refuses to do porn. It's closed source. You can't do porn with it. Stable Diffusion refuses to do porn, but it's open source. You download the code from GitHub, you remove the restrictions, and you make porn. Practically all of still porn online is made with that system because of open source factors. And I'm really split about this myself, about how I feel about this, because I love open source. I mean, I went to the goddamn Helsinki University at the same time with Linus Torvalds when he was writing Linux kernel. What do you think? I love open source. It changed the world. Linux is now not only this planet's most common operating system, but also the most common operating system in Mars, which is pretty cool, don't you think? However, if there's a place where open source is potentially dangerous, this is it. I mean, the fact that we built these systems which are really powerful, scarily powerful, And if it's open source, you can just remove the guardrails, the safety systems, the security systems. That is worrying. And when you look at these rogue large language models like WormGPT, BlackGPT, all of these, despite the name, none of them are based on GPT because GPT is closed. They're typically based on Llama, which is open.
What's the hardware? The hardware bottleneck or barrier to, because a large organization has access to AWS infrastructure and can actually run this in kind of infrastructure as a service models. What is the barrier to deploying these open source models from a hardware perspective to these malicious actors?
Vast majority of them don't run their own hardware to run this at all. It's run on cloud, and it might be run on stolen accounts.
There was one just recently where there's you can get basically cloud optimized to run these LLMs, these generative AIs, and generally it's a kind of tick box to say, okay, I want to be able to run this one, and then you can launch an instance. Once you tick the box, you can just use a command line and launch an instance of that AI. And what has been detected recently, I can't remember who it was who detected it, I'm very sorry, was an actor who had gotten some cloud credentials, gotten in, found that it could run these LLMs, set up their own instances, and then they'd set up a reverse proxy so that on multiple of these instances, they had the reverse proxy going. So they were most likely selling access. And then, as you say, you're basically running your malicious version on somebody else's cloud.
Now, in the spirit of this podcast, we're trying to be positive. So I think my point here is you've just named a number of steps that's taken for an attacker to get an open source LLM deployed on some infrastructure. It's a lot easier.
And we have to remember the training part is much harder on hardware than actually using it. And if someone has trained the rogue LLM already, the actual power needs for using it are much stronger.
To customize the LLM to your function, it's challenging, but it's doable for a legitimate organization. But doing that maliciously when you've stolen someone else's cloud to do it, and at any moment you might lose access, it's really going to inhibit what you can do and what you can attempt.
And there's also another thing I want to mention about AI, which is about the hype around AI. And of course, we all see the hype around like how the world is changing, and it really is changing. It's quite mind-blowing how quickly the world is changing right now. I mean, here at Sphere, the demonstration I showed to the audience was comparing to a song made by an AI that I showed last year, 12 months ago. And then I made a new version this year, and it is like night and day. It's amazing how much they've changed. They really do make songs which will be in top 40 straight out of one of these generators. I'll bet you during this year we'll have a top 40 hit made by an AI. If it happens, remember you heard it here first. If it doesn't, never mind. However,
do you feel like diversifying? Maybe you could become a musician, a rock star?
I actually looked at how to upload songs on Spotify, but I haven't done it yet.
Technically, executive producer?
Right, yeah, I'll get the credits and the royalties. I hope so. Now, the thing about hype. It's not just the hype about good things. There's this weird hype about threats as well. And what I mean here is that if you Google around about AI attacks, you get the impression that, every crime gang is already writing LLM malware code, and every single CEO scam or BEC scam is pulled off with perfect real-time Teams calls from the CFO, which really isn't happening. So there's this weird hype about things that could happen, and you give the impression it's happening already, when in reality, the practical things we see, for example, with deepfakes, are cloned voices with pre-recorded, pre-rendered voices of executives, which has happened a couple of times. But beyond that, it's just hype.
There was, I think it was either Vietnam or Thailand, they introduced a law requiring video confirmation for transfers over a certain amount. And there was some attackers who set up some mobile malware and a huge amount of other services all together to get around this and to generate videos. So they would have to get onto someone's device, and they'd need someone to invite them in and to install the software, and then they would start prompting them with notifications. They had all of these services set up to get to them generating a video. And then they would take that video and use it as the basis to render another video that they could then use to submit to the bank, to make a transfer, and all. The number of steps. Like, it was wonderful to read about because the amount of effort these people are putting in. I mean, there's that thing that people turn to crime to make an easy buck.
Right.
Those bucks, they were not easy.
Right.
They were hard bucks.
They actually earned it.
Exactly. It's just one of those things. You go, maybe maybe just get a job.
But if our metric is total eradication of an entire attack chain, then we're looking at the wrong metrics. Right? We can do good by denting these operations, even if we can't realistically expect to eradicate them altogether.
Yeah.
So that's a positive again.
Yeah, it is. And I do think there's much more upsides for cyber defense coming out of AI than what the attackers would do. However, what I really I'm sort of interested in seeing who's going to win once we see what I've been expecting for quite a while, which is full automation of malware campaigns. I mean, basically giving them much faster reaction times. All defenders, of course, have automated everything. So once we detect something which we know is malicious, creating detection, testing detection, deploying the detection back to clients around the world, that's very fast. Attackers, all of them are still in manual mode. They don't realize that their attacks have been blocked. And when they do, it takes them hours or days. And then they manually go and recompile, get new domains, change the command and control server address, and change the IP range, whatever they have to do, rewrite the spam emails. They could automate all of that. And then we would really see which one would be faster. Because right now, I've compared this to a game of ping pong where you have a robot against a human. The robot is much faster. And we're the robot. We're the fast ones. We're actually winning in this. But when it gets to a game of ping pong where it's a robot against another robot, who's going to win? And we don't really know because this hasn't happened yet, but it could happen anytime.
But they are surprisingly conservative. Attackers are.
Yeah.
They will gently change as they go.
Yeah. But why invest into something that already works? Like if they're making great money with the attacks today, why would go and do anything about it until they have to? So maybe that's the logic.
Exactly.
So maybe when we get asked kind of how's the threat developed as well, I think the a better question is how have defenses developed? And then we can start to predict how attacks will develop to counteract that and so forth and so forth. And that ping pong analogy kind of comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's shutting doors and they're not making drastic changes. And I think as a lot of people would observe that, implementing AIs well, using them in your business change and so on, it can be a pretty drastic change you've got to make.
Sure. And it's a leadership issue, like almost everything in cyber. Actually, everything in technology is really a leadership issue. And I think the biggest challenge we have for getting better in technology altogether and getting better in cybersecurity is for the leaders to understand this better. And when you look at the typical leadership teams and board members of big companies, they're typically like old men who are not really at their best with cyber. They might be good in business or in finance, but when it comes to cyber, they like to avoid these discussions because they don't really understand it. And that's simply not good enough. And the example I have about, leadership in AI is the chairman of our company, Risto, who actually went back to Stanford to study coding machine learning algorithms 5 years ago, something like that, which really quickly changed attitudes in the leadership team and elsewhere in the company. Holy hell. And the chairman goes back to study how these things work. This probably is interesting. This is probably important. We probably should pay attention. And I'm not really saying that all chairmen of all companies should do this, but it is a leadership issue.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, maybe now I'm starting to get pessimistic, but where at kind of leadership level, AI is not seen as a tool to help the professionals, but it's seen as potentially a replacement for headcount. And that's where I say vulnerabilities get introduced, but I don't mean vulnerabilities in the terms necessarily of a CVE or a technical kind of cyber vulnerability, but something in the way of process or something that can be exploited or a lever for attackers to pull can be introduced when the kind of human oversight possibly gets removed.
Yeah, exactly so. And to be a bit more positive, the thing about AI and making changes in an organization is, are you a cat person?
No, far from it. Should I be?
No, I know.
Okay.
They have the term herding cats,
Okay.
And they talk about how making changes, getting a lot of technical people, leadership people to go in the same direction. It's herding cats. They want to go wherever. But those people who are trying to make those changes from a malicious side, they're herding malicious cats.
I see. Yeah,
that's even worse.
Herding malicious cats.
That's more like herding small tigers who are waiting for an opportunity to do you over. That's what that is.
One positive thing I want to say to listeners who are like thinking about AI and how it's going to change the work in their company and how could the company use AI better. many people I've spoken with feel like that they're already late. That this revolution it's already happened and we're late. We weren't using it. You are not late. Like this revolution has barely begun. It's the very beginning. It is going to be a big revolution, potentially bigger than the internet, but it will take a while. Just like internet revolution took a while, and when it actually happened, it turned out to be a much bigger revolution and a different revolution what we thought in the beginning. So you have time. It's going to change the world, but if your company isn't deploying AI everywhere already, that's okay.
You're better off kind of taking your time actually, and because a not insignificant proportion of companies that are using AI now aren't using AI well now, and are using it in a way that might leave them exposed.
But you shouldn't ignore it either. Like I mean, if you ignore AI altogether, you will share the fate with companies which ignored the internet in 1996.
So don't knee-jerk into it.
Yeah,
build it in properly.
Be aware, but be aware maybe that you'll be taking some steps. Don't take a full leap and bet the whole house on something right now.
And also be aware, I think that maybe AI is a stretch, but certain kind of advanced machine learning and all of these kind of have been in place and have been deployed by a lot of businesses for a long time now. This is it is a leap, but this has not come from nothing to 100 in the last couple of months.
Yeah. Machine learning has been used in our company for a very long time, but of course, generative AI is really changing the scope of what we can do. It's quite amazing how quickly things are moving right now. But after all these AI falls and winters and springs, now it generally really truly is the hottest summer in history.
And we are not just talking about this small box that we're in.
That's true. Arrests or indictments.
Yeah.
Sentencing. We just sentenced the virus, actually a hacker here in Finland.
That guy.
The
news about this hacker. And we picked up on how it had been reported differently in two different news sites. So one of them said, cyber bastard caught and sentenced, which we could get behind. And another one said...
Are you going to have to bleep that in order to keep our rating on, on Spotify?
It's fine. And the other one said, popular Finnish hacker. So hold on a second. I don't think he's particularly popular. There may be a slight translation issue going on here.
He might be well known.
Notorious, possibly.
Yeah. I think it's high time we stopped
glorifying
these
criminals and in our marketing pieces and in our media pieces.
In fact, I think that the one thing where we're failing the worst in all of cyber is actually catching more criminals and sentencing them and putting them into jail. The more we're able to do that, the more we are going to cut down on the actual problem, but even more importantly, show to potential newcomers that crime doesn't pay. Even online crime doesn't pay. 'Cause right now, there's awful lot of these young kids with some skills who are looking for a quick buck, and the role model they see are these Russian guys in their Lambos and popping champagne in their parties, and they want some of that, which is understandable. But we should be able to cut that somehow, and that's really... It's hard to do, but that's what we should be doing better.
The deterrence is a really difficult piece, and we looked at this with kind of Black Cat ransomware leaving their affiliate, folding as a franchisor, and the Lockbit takedown. But actually, what you need to do really to move the needle in a significant way is convince people to exit the market, and you can do that by kind of law enforcement deterrence. But when they're in kind of countries that have unfriendly kind of legal jurisdictions, then it's not a cyber problem anymore. It's a political problem. And it's why I really enjoyed watching what the law enforcement collaboration did with the UK National Crime Agency and some law enforcement across, I think, in Finland participated, and around Europol and others did a fantastic job. But it became more than just a simple seizure and law enforcement action. It became a bit of a psychological operation.
Yeah.
I thought, which I really enjoyed. I think it's the first time I've seen that. And they haven't arrested him. They've named him. They haven't arrested him. But there is definitely some psychological impact that's happened there, which is something that we'd never kind of achieved before.
Dmitry Koroshev, we're coming for you.
Yeah.
You can stay calm in Voronezh, but we know where you are. But actually, just publicizing these identifying information about crime leaders like this, even though if they don't get arrested, they're still going to be a bad place. I mean, Dmitry or Lockbit Sub was known for fighting very aggressively against other competing gangs, including doxing other gang leaders. So now that he's known, he's probably on the run.
And someone made the brilliant point that they stated how much he'd made. And he probably hasn't paid any income tax. And say what you will about Russia, I'm pretty sure they're going to want their cut of that 100 mil.
And there's tax in Russia, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So.
That's a great point. And taxman will always find you.
Yeah.
Whoever that taxman is.
Exactly. Whoever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing is that the jurisdiction is unfriendly now, but it might not always be.
Exactly.
In 10 years' time, you might be a convenient lever to pull.
Or maybe he's stupid and goes for a holiday in the Mediterranean. Unlikely. But some of them have done this.
No,
yes.
do it. It's a lovely place.
Oh, yeah.
Go. You should go.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The food.
So what do you think about the length of the sentence we got here in Finland for the Vastaamo hacker? I mean, 31,980 victims in major hack with very confidential information. Very good investigation from the investigation point of view. The police and the prosecutors did great work in figuring out, including tracking Monero payments, which was amazing.
Really tough, that, yeah.
End result, 6 years and 6 years and 3 months was the final sentence. Of course, it will be challenged, but that's right now what the state is right now. What do you think about that?
6 years, yeah. I think my frame of reference is Lapsus, who seemed to be treated a little bit more leniently for a couple of crimes until he wasn't, where he was giving an indefinite sentence. I think there was probably some reasons behind that, but really my frame of reference now is from no kind of custodial sentencing to an indefinite custodial sentencing, and six years kind of fits in the middle of that. So that's a really roundabout way of saying I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the difficult thing, like of putting someone in prison for an amount of time. As you know, there's the argument of punishment or rehabilitation, and I think the issue there've been a few people who've been picked up, quite young men generally, who get picked up doing this sort of thing. And there was a story about a kid who then got an Amazon Fire Stick, loaded Linux on it, plugged it into his hotel TV, and then was straight back into hacking and trading as he was before. And so after doing that, he'd quite blatantly broken the deal that he'd agreed to, and he was then resentenced again. And I think that's the thing, that you've got to. It's no good for us to be locking someone up forever. And I've known some people who were hackers who've then managed to turn it around and gone, God, I was not clever. I was very smart, but I wasn't clever.
Sure.
And I think you've got to give someone enough rope to hang themselves in that way. I'm not suggesting corporal punishment. I mean, you've got to try and rehabilitate, but you've got to be on hand to say to them, okay, you've made it wrong.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Too long, too short?
He was sentenced as a first-timer, which is a mistake in my book. This guy he's 27 now. He's not a kid anymore. He's done a lot of cybercrime, including swatting and things like that, which really put people in danger. So my big beef here is that he should not have sentenced as a first-timer. As a first-timer, he's going to do 50% of the time.
Yeah.
So he's going to be out in 3 years, or actually, because he's already been arrested for quite a while, in 2 or something like that, 2 or 2.5. So yeah, that's my problem. But nevertheless, I'm really happy with the end of the. I'm really happy law enforcement found the guy, were able to prove he's the guy, and actually got a sentence.
It was a wonderful result. Like we talked about Monero and the fact of it's designed to be difficult to track, and they managed to cut straight through.
And how many budding cyber criminals will that deter as well? Which is another.
That's great.
Another benefit.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the benefits about the Lockbit sub-identification as well, is that the whole mystique and the personas and so on, and you go, nope, it's this guy.
And the fact that he wasn't driving a Lambo, he was driving a Mercedes.
Probably least.
The least Mercedes. Sure. Exactly.
C series.
Yeah.
Diesel.
Yeah. All right, but I think we've covered a lot of good things. It's not just, hopeless. There are upsides in cyber, and we are making progress, and things are sometimes getting better.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that we have that job of warning people about threats. But a lot of the time what I hear day to day is actually from people I'm working with doing something new, like new detections, new developments, people just pulling things apart, and I love it. That's one of the things I love about the job, is that, you go to someone, oh, hey, we found this thing. And like a few hours later, they go, they like run past in chat, go, hey, you'll never guess what. And they just ripped apart something and created a new detection from it. And you're like, oh, brilliant.
Yeah, that's really good. I wish I was able to do that kind of thing.
That would give us some network data one day.
Yeah. I just talk about it on podcasts. Yeah, really positive.
Well, that's us done. I think that's us done with Sphere. I think that they've been turning the lights on and off us for a while, so I think they want us to leave.
Yeah.
There was that woman who wrestled the water bottle out of my hands earlier, and she definitely wanted me to leave. So maybe we should take the hint. Have they locked the doors?
There's only one way to find out.
Yeah. Great. Thanks very much, Mikko. Really appreciate having you on.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And it's not all bad news, guys.
Exactly.
Cheers.